Welcome everyone to our webinar on e-commerce for development. My name is Roxana Radu. I am Program Manager and Internet Governance Associate at DiploFoundation, and I will be moderating today's session, which is part of a broader series of expert discussions that we lead at Diplo as part of our capacity development activities on digital commerce. We also run a series of webinars around digital policy issues and hot topics of the moment. This time we partner with the e-Residency program of the Republic of Estonia to discuss the inclusion of small businesses from developing countries and least developed countries in global value chains. This webinar is organized by two organizations that are both members of the e-Trade for All initiative. And I encourage you all to look up this initiative because they are planning a number of very interesting activities in the coming year. While digital commerce is often mentioned as a key opportunity to foster development and achieve the sustainable development goals, there are significant obstacles that are faced by small and medium-sized enterprises, in particular in developing countries. According to a recent ICT survey on e-commerce competitiveness, more than 60% of SMEs in developing countries have considered engaging in cross-border e-commerce, but have not been able to do so due to a number of challenges that we will discuss today in this webinar with our three speakers. We have here with us today Ms. Marilia Maciel, who is a digital policy senior researcher at DiploFoundation and our internet governance expert and e-commerce contributor. Marilia is also reading a course on digital commerce that we are running on a regular basis at Diplo, and she will be speaking today about the main obstacles faced by SMEs in developing countries when trying to do business online globally. And then we have two guests from Estonia, Mr. Alex Wellman, who is originally from the US, but moved to Estonia to lead the marketing efforts of the e-Residency program. Welcome, Alex. And Ms. Ait Veski from Tallinn, who serves as a community support specialist at the e-Residency program. Ait is also pursuing a degree in organizational behavior at Tallinn University. The two of them will discuss about the goals of the e-Residency program, some practical implications, and also link this to developments in digital commerce globally and the role of small and medium-sized enterprises. And our webinar will work today in the following way. We will start with insights from our three speakers, and then we will take questions from the participants in the online chat. Everyone has the possibility to type the questions down, and then we will collect them and forward them to the speakers at the end of the three presentations. So I suggest we start with Marilia. Marilia, if you're ready, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roxana, for the great introduction to this discussion, and thank very much to our colleagues from e-Residency for the opportunity to discuss this very interesting and groundbreaking initiative that the Republic of Estonia has created. In the next few minutes, I would like just to offer some brief remarks to provide a general context of the changes that have happened in global digital trade and why small and medium-sized enterprises, especially the ones from developing countries, need some additional help to take full advantages of the benefits that e-commerce offers. Well, global flows are at the core of what we are discussing here. Global flows of goods, services, finances, they have historically underpinned global and social development. In the past, these global flows were carried by ships that crossed the oceans, or they were carried by trucks down dusty lanes, or they were carried by cargo airplanes. Nowadays, these global flows are carried by datagrams, which are small packets of digital information carried through digital infrastructure and fiber optic cables. And this change in medium is also associated to a phenomenon of digitization. So it is estimated that around the year 2000, just a quarter of the information available in the world was in digital format. In 2010, the situation had completely reversed. So only 2% of the information available in the world was in non-digital format. So there are two big changes associated here and sort of feedbacking between themselves. One of them is the availability, our ability to move data across the world instantaneously through the internet. And the second one is digitization of information. And together, these two phenomena have changed economy in very profound ways. They have enabled new business models to exist. They have transformed business models that existed before, and they have transformed as well the composition of trade. So if we think about around the year 2008, at the time of the global economic crisis, the global trade in goods was growing fast and growing twice as fast as gross domestic product or GDP. And this was linked to the expansion of big multinationals and the supply chains that they were putting in place worldwide. In recent years, it has been reported that in 2017, the growth of multinationals has slowed down. The growth of traditional trade of goods, physical goods, has slowed down as well. But still, at the same time, we notice that economic globalization has not halted. It is still moving forward, and it is supported by soaring digital flows. So in parallel to sort of a recession of traditional trade, the impact of cross-border data flows is still pushing the growth of GDP and has been responsible for a growth of GDP of more than 10% only in the last decade. So the growth of e-commerce is a reflex and a phenomenon of this larger growth of data flows. And in particular, when we speak of cross-border e-commerce, this is particularly true. Cross-border e-commerce today accounts for 12% of the trade in goods, and it's expected to grow twice the rate of the growth of domestic e-commerce. Yet, like Roxana mentioned in the beginning, there is considerable challenges for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to engage in e-commerce globally. The majority of SMEs, especially from developing countries, indicate that the domestic markets are still their base of operation. And for the few ones that do engage in cross-border trade, only 30% of their revenue comes from cross-border trade. So they still have revenue from doing business locally in their national markets. At the same time, if we look at the export between developed and developing country SMEs, we see that SMEs in developed countries export twice or 3 times more than SMEs in developing countries. So there is an imbalance. In a nutshell, then, we could say that global flows have increased worldwide, all across the board, and this is true for every country in the world. However, the rate of this growth remains extremely uneven, and the volume of global flows and the volume of e-commerce is still concentrated among a small set of leading countries, and while other countries are sort of being left behind. So if e-commerce is important to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and this has been recognized by several international organizations, then this imbalance on digital flows and e-commerce need to be redressed somehow. We need to make sure that micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises can benefit from global trade. There are some initiatives that try to map and to identify what are the exact reasons for these imbalances. A report that has been published by the International Trade Center, ITC, did a great job in surveying SMEs in more than 100 countries and identified that the barriers for SMEs participation in global trade are related to 4 key areas. The first of them is need to have access to better e-platforms, platforms in which these small companies can advertise and sell their products. We know that many times these big behemoths platforms like eBay or Amazon, they have a lot of restrictions when it comes to the location of the seller, and sellers located in some developing countries cannot advertise the products in these platforms for different reasons. Payment services is something that is still a very important obstacle, access to payment services. Many SMEs in developing countries need to be paid by cash on delivery, which is not a reliable solution for many different reasons, even for security reasons. So e-payments is something that needs to advance. Streamlined custom procedures is something that is very complicated. So when you don't have a base in a country in which you want to export to, you need to pass through customs procedures, and it's extremely time-consuming and many times bureaucratically complicated. There is a discussion in the WTO right now how to establish a single window that would facilitate a bureaucracy for companies, especially for SMEs, but this is still under discussion, and we need to see how this debate is going to take place in the next ministerial. But one point that has been identified that is particularly interesting finding from this research is that, contrary to the perception that cross-border e-commerce would eliminate the need for commercial presence in export markets, the majority of SMEs have responded and considered that it is in their best commercial interest to have an establishment in the export market that they want to do business with whenever possible. The reasons for this vary a lot. It can be related to facilitating delivery of products, or to strengthening customer relationship, or enhancing the brand in the particular market they want to operate. But it also relates to regulatory reasons and taxations and access to banking. So SMEs mentioned that there are serious barriers to setting a presence in the market that they want to do business with. So this presence seems to be something that e-Residency as a project aims to tackle. Of course, there is not one silver bullet. As we saw, the problems that SMEs face are multidimensional. However, it seems that e-Residency as an initiative could help to tackle the problem of presence in international and export markets. So, like others, I'm looking forward to know about e-Residency as a project, and how can e-Residency help SMEs to overcome some of these hurdles. So I pass it over back to Roxana so she can introduce e-Residency and our speakers.
Thank you very much, Marilia. A very useful overview of the challenges that SMEs are facing in different parts of the world. And we are discussing today one of the solutions proposed, and it comes from Estonia, which is the first country to introduce such a program. We have with us two experts on that. So I will just start by asking you, what is the e-Residency program, and how does it help SMEs to reach a global audience? What kind of facilities does it put into place, and how is the wider public benefiting from this?
Sure, thank you, and that's a great way to start this, Maria. Thank you. I think before we talk directly about e-Residency, I think it's important to talk a little bit about Estonia and what they've done to sort of set the stage for this program. So, as you know, Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union for 65 years, and they regained their independence in 1991, and they had the opportunity then to sort of hit the reset button and start over. So they decided to digitize all government services, and that has continued up until today, where almost every interaction with the government can be done online using a secure digital identity. So Estonians can vote online, they can register their animals, they can pick up their prescription medicines, they can start a company, anything you can do except for two things. You can't get married online or buy property, but every other interaction with the government can be done digitally. So about 3 years ago, Estonia thought, we only have 1.3 million people. So as we're talking about, small domestic markets, let's let other people apply and join this society and actually, be a part of this. So 3 years ago, the e-Residency initiative was launched, and now anyone can apply and receive a government-issued ID card from Estonia, which can be used to access digital services. We actually just had our 3rd anniversary celebration 2 days ago, and so far we've had 28,000 people sign up for e-Residency. And when it was started, it's sort of a government startup. We weren't sure exactly what the value proposition would be, why people would use this exactly. But what we've discovered over the last year or so is that the main benefit is the ability for people to register a company in Estonia and therefore have a fully fledged business within the EU single market from wherever they happen to live. So, so as I mentioned, we have about 3,000 companies started with e-Residency, and one area we're seeing growth in is these sort of emerging markets. So our fastest growing country is actually Ukraine, where we have a lot of tech entrepreneurs, a lot of people who want to sell their services online. Turkey and India as well are really fast-growing areas for us. These are people who, the internet and the private sector development has meant that they can, do business and offer their services on the global market. But oftentimes they run into problems, as Maria mentioned, accessing banking, payment services, establishing a company in the market in which they wish to export their services or goods. So this gives them a really easy option to become an e-resident, set up a company in Estonia, and then begin accessing the services they need to be successful when they do go sell their services on the global market. I will turn it over to my colleague Ike here, who maybe can explain a little bit about how practically people achieve this.
Hello everybody. So the first step to gain access to Estonian e-services is to apply for e-residency. We have an online application for that, and this is where you can learn how easy it is to communicate with the Estonian government. The e-residency application is issued by the Estonian Police and Border Guard Board. Everything is done online except for the part where you actually go to the embassy to pick up your document. Now, once you have received your document, or even before that, you can start doing research on Estonian business landscape. You can contact the business service provider, and you can start registering a company. So in Estonia it is necessary to have a legal address. We have listed many business service providers or virtual office service providers who provide the address. But besides that, they also consult you on all your business needs. For example, which kind of banking solution to go for, or which kind of payment service provider to go to, or even regarding taxation and other accounting services or marketing services. So when you have your card, you have found the business service provider that works best for you. You will be able to register your company online. This usually takes, for your effort, it takes a couple of hours maybe, and the whole process together 2 days, no more. So that's how quickly it goes, using the Estonian infrastructure. And then once the company is registered, you can apply for a license if one is needed, and then you can apply for business banking. For banking, you currently have 3 options. One is to apply for an Estonian bank account. At the moment, still a visit to Estonia is needed, so bank could see who the client is. The other option is to go for a fintech business banking account. For example, we have Holvi listed on our website. Holvi offers you a business banking account. You can receive payments, you can send payments out, you can do even accounting using their services. Holvi also has an online store, so you can market your own products. And then you can check payment service providers like PayPal, PayMill, Braintree, and you're pretty much ready and set to do your business.
Yeah. So I think, very practically, what we're offering someone is the ability to open an EU company and access, payment service providers within the European Union from virtually anywhere in the world. So from a development standpoint, it's a huge opportunity, for an entrepreneur located somewhere where they don't have access to these services, but also it's helping Estonia's economy as well. So it's really a win-win for both groups of people. We're giving access to people to access the business environment, and then we get to have a bunch of great new customers for our country and for our citizens. And I guess, any other questions right now, or?
Thank you very much for introducing the program. I see that we have some colleagues typing their question, but in between, maybe we can ask about how this works with the EU single market and the harmonized rules. Do you have some statistics about the kind of businesses that are preferred for people who sign up for the EU residency program, the kind of implications for the EU market?
With e-Residency are people who are offering digital services, because when you when you start to sell products, physical products, you do run into additional challenges. So when you start to sell physical products, you do need to meet customs laws and regulations. You normally need a warehousing services, and so if you do want to sell your products to Estonia, or excuse me, to the European Union market, this can be a good solution for you. But really, the main people who are benefiting this are digital service providers. And once you have a presence within the EU with e-Residency, say for example, we have many people offering consulting services, or in Ukraine, for example, we have a lot of people doing IT outsourcing. So a lot of people in Ukraine, are very talented programmers and web developers and designers. And then, they can do it at a very cost-effective rate within Ukraine. But then what happens is, if they're working with clients in the EU, it can be an absolute nightmare for them to try to bill their clients and invoice their clients. So they might have a great skill set which they can offer to the global market, but they can't practically get paid for this. So we offer them the chance to have a European business. And then if say they have a client in Germany, the German client can just make a SEPA payment through their bank account to their Estonian bank account, and it's really super easy for them to then receive payments for their services. So or same thing for India. We have a lot of similar people there as well, offering sort of digital services, programming, marketing, and for them it's even more challenging to receive payments from the Eurozone. So when they have a company registered here in Estonia and in the EU, it makes their life so much easier to get paid for their services.
Thank you very much for this explanation. We have two questions coming in. The first one is from Jovan. How do you ensure the identity of the applicant? And the second one from Vladimir. Why can't wedding be done digitally? It's a very interesting question. Maybe you can each address.
Yeah, maybe I'll take the wedding one first. It's an interesting question. So as I mentioned, I'm from the United States, and I got married right before I came here. And I happened to forget my marriage certificate stating I was married before I came here. And in order to achieve that, to get a copy of that here in Estonia, I had to mail something back to the US. It had to be mailed to 3 different government offices, and then be mailed back to me here in Estonia. And the process took roughly 2 months. And my Estonian colleague said, just wait a minute. He pulled his ID card, plugged it into his computer, and showed me within the government portal that it showed he was married. So really, for me, that was an eye-opening experience. But as far as getting marriage, I think Estonians, it's a really important decision, more than starting a business or something else. So I think, when you get married, it's still something that needs to be done in person. And then I guess the other question was how do we sort of vet the people or decide who gets a digital ID? So most people who sign up for e-Residency are okay to receive the ID, but the background check is completed by our Police and Border Guard Board, using the same sort of scrutiny they use when someone applies for a visa or when someone applies for a normal residency permit. So they check all of the Interpol and databases, just to make sure that there's no criminal record for the person or anything like that. But I think the denial rate is less than 1%. So almost everyone who applies, gets a card. Yes.
So a little bit more about the application process is, with the application you provide your personal information, you also provide a copy of your passport.
Yes.
And the credentials of the Estonian e-Residency Digi-ID will be based on your passport. And Police, as Alex said, already will review the application, make the background check. They also want to see your motivation on using Estonian e-services. And once the decision is made and the decision is to grant you your residency, the document will be printed and sent to the pickup location where you personally will need to go and pick up the document. Upon the pickup day, you will need to give your fingerprints, and the consular officer at the embassy will make sure of your identity. So the document is really yours.
Yes. And I see, so this kind of gets into the question that we always get, and I see it in the chat here about money laundering and other issues. But you know, it's one part of e-residency in Estonia's environment in general is it's extremely transparent, which really helps combat some of these issues that people you know, are concerned about. For example, the business registry in Estonia is completely public. You can look to see exactly who is connected to a company, who is an owner of a company. You know, so this really does a lot to combat these sort of issues. And also the digital identity. You know, if you're interested in committing fraud or money laundering, Estonia is really not the best place to do it at all. The environment is so transparent, and you know, all the transactions are sort of not monitored but recorded. You know, using this platform. So if you're going to commit fraud, this is really not the place to do it. And I think this transparency is really, you know, really good for entrepreneurs sort of in developing countries and in other places where maybe they're in their own countries, you know, they're not accustomed to this sort of transparency. Sometimes it's difficult to, you know, they have to maybe you know, go to different offices or you know, have a personal contact somewhere to get something done. Here it's really, you know, everyone's equal. You can get things done, and it's transparent, and it's really easy for everyone to be an entrepreneur.
I see there is another technical question about picking up the document if you don't have an embassy in your own home country. Of course, you can choose any other pickup location that is most convenient for you to travel. It doesn't have to be one at your home country. It doesn't even have to be the neighboring country. So if you know you're going to travel to India, but you live in Turkey, you can pick up the document in New Delhi.
Thank you very much for answering already some of the questions in the chat. I'd like to give the floor to Marilia quickly and then go back to the questions and have another.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rox. I think the advantage of having the mic to ask a question to Alex and Art related to how is the relation with the other European countries? We know that the world is undergoing this trend of protectionism in the US, but also in Europe. Do other countries see these as somehow damaging or upsetting the balance of competition in the EU or on the European Union, or do they feel like it's something positive for all of them?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that. One, I would say that Estonia has done this the right way. We're not selling this as sort of as a tax haven. We actually want to be extremely transparent and with our taxes, and Estonia shares all of the data regarding taxes with all the other European governments. So we're not trying to, you know, hide or allow people to escape taxes in their home country. Estonia does have a very good tax regime here. Generally, there's a 20% flat tax on corporations, and there's a 0% tax if you reinvest the revenues back in the company. But you're always taxed on, you know, where you live and generate value, and we do share this data with the other countries. So, you know, in Europe, it's a single market. You have the right to start a company in another European states. So there hasn't been much pushback. Also, the ID card doesn't allow you, you know, to travel to Estonia or live in Estonia or the EU. So it's really just about accessing digital services. So we're actually seeing other countries look at this model for themselves. For example, we just heard that Croatia announced that they're going to set up their own e-residency program. We have Lithuania, our sort of neighbor here, who is exploring this idea. So I think really more and more countries are going to actually, you know, they're not shying away from this and saying, why are you doing this? They're saying, how can we set this up for ourselves?
Thank you. So back to you with more questions now. We have Merzdat from Iran asking about the situation under sanctions. So if a country is under sanctions, how does the Estonian government deal with such cases? And then a question from Cristobal related to taxes. You already explained there is an income tax that is flat, but he's also asking about the financial fees to get the money out from Estonian banks once your business is profitable. And are there any customs procedures? And a final question in this round around the use of blockchain. Have you considered using blockchain for storing records?
Sure. So I think so. There's a question regarding countries under sanctions. So Estonia does follow all the sanctions rules. We don't the ID card is a government document. So if for some reason you're not able to access it from your country, then unfortunately you're not able to access it. And also for our banks and for our fintech, if your country is on the blacklist from the FATFA. Unfortunately, of course, you're not able to access bank accounts or fintech accounts here. So, e-Residency, it's important to remember this isn't something separate from Estonia or the European Union. It's just access to that. It's accessing the same rights and obligations Estonian citizens have, just digitally. Many of them, at least.
Maybe on that topic, also one of our colleagues, Adam, has written a really nice article about who benefits from e-residency and how to do business. So if you go to Medium and you look up e-residency blog, you will find his article. It's how to do business in EU and access banking. It also brings out who benefits and who unfortunately does not benefit so much from e-residency.
And yeah, regarding taxes, I mean, I did cover a little bit. International taxes, when you start doing cross-border, is extremely difficult, and we know it's gets even more difficult if you're an SME in a developing country, say, or something. But we haven't solved this problem completely yet. But one thing we want to develop is at least make it easy for people to understand their obligations, and increase the data sharing and the transparency between the governments. So in Estonia, for Estonian citizens, filing taxes is extremely easy. You just log on at the end of the year, check that everything is okay, and click submit, and it's done. So we eventually want to get to the point where it's that easy, for e-residents as well. But right now, many of them do sort of work with business service providers here in Estonia to guide them through these questions. But I will say this: the tax office here in Estonia is the nicest tax office I've ever dealt with in my life. They're very happy to. In fact, the head of the tax board actually published the blog on our blog, addressing some of the tax questions for e-residents. So I'm happy to share that. If you'd like to see it later. But yeah, and they also have a dedicated email address where e-residents can ask questions regarding their tax obligations.
And on the same thing, Alex mentioned that Estonian Tax and Customs Board published the article. They also helped us to put together FAQ on taxation for e-residents. So if you go on our website, eresident.gov.de, and you go to FAQ section and take taxation, this is written in cooperation with the tax board. And Alex mentioned that filing taxes in Estonia is super easy. It's just literally one click if you're a natural person. If you're a small business owner in Estonia, it also takes very little effort. And we spoke about future earlier. And the Estonian Tax and Customs Board actually is looking into a way to make submitting taxation for all companies registered in Estonia much, much easier in the coming years. And maybe even very long term in the future, they will collaborate with other taxation offices from other countries and see a way how tax offices can communicate, dividing your taxes in between countries so you don't have to do it anymore. Yes. That's further into the future, but that just shows the initiative from the Estonian officials.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was the third question was about blockchain. And yeah, I'm happy to talk. So one of the things people always maybe are a little bit skeptical about is when you say, okay, everything's digitized, but what about privacy and security of these sort of things? And I think it's really important to understand that in Estonia, and as a resident or as an e-resident also, your data, you own your own data in Estonia. A good example of that is in Estonia, all the medical records are on something called keyless signature infrastructure, KSI, which is sort of a type of blockchain-based technology, meaning that if any doctor or anyone accesses your medical records, there is a record of that. So you can see exactly when and who accessed your records for a number of different government services. So this provides sort of transparency and allows people to trust the government more, that they can see who is accessing their records. And if someone doesn't have the right to do it, you can file a complaint, and there's been many people who have been arrested. I shouldn't say many, but it's really a lot of safeguards in place for these sort of things, and these technologies do use blockchain. And regarding blockchain as well, Estonia, we're working with the government right now to become a very friendly nation for people who want to start crypto-related businesses and blockchain-related businesses. We see that as the future, so that's something else we're working on at e-Residency.
Thank you very much. And while we're waiting for more questions from our online participants, I'd like to turn to Marilia now to give us maybe an overview of some of the other initiatives out there to solve the obstacles that SMEs face in developing countries to enter the e-commerce markets. E-Residency is one of the solutions proposed, but I know there are discussions right now around a number of regulatory frameworks, initiatives of all sorts, including discussions in the WTO for facilitating.
Thank you for the question, Roxana. Actually, it's very timely because the next ministerial of the World Trade Organization will take place in December, so we are very close, and there is a very prominent emphasis on e-commerce. As we know, the WTO has not moved forward with discussions on topics for many years, and now the WTO Secretariat and the Director General have decided, together with member countries, to make progress in the e-commerce discussions. The WTO has a mandate to discuss e-commerce since '98, but little progress has been made in terms of having actual frameworks of negotiations. What member countries do in the WTO is to discuss. But there are several proposals on the table. Many of them would be of benefit for developing countries and SMEs. And these are the proposals related to trade facilitation. So as we know, there are huge bureaucracies when you arrive with products at the customs, and the single window that I mentioned before is one of the proposals that have been put on the table with a lot of support. Instead of going to different customs administrations and branches of the government, you would have a single point of entry in which you would sort out all the bureaucratic problems. Another point that is always in the agenda is the renewal of the moratorium on taxation on electronic transmissions, and this is something that probably will happen, the renewal of the moratorium. But there is also a very important discussion on raising the minimis in order to make sure that small parcels, which constitute a large part of e-commerce today, people that buy single products online and these products get shipped to them, there are small parcels circulating, and many times these small parcels get taxed. And this is not good for the companies, this is not good for the consumers, and this generates a lot of work for customs administration that needs to charge taxation into small parcels. So they want to raise the minimis to make sure that the value of small parcels does not fall into taxation. But besides the measures related to trade facilitation, countries in the WTO have been discussing that regulatory frameworks are very important. So there are still many countries in the world who do not have a strong cybercrime legislation, for instance. And we know that a lot of problems related to digital commerce are related to security issues. So the theft of bank data or personal data or fraud or online scams. So when the country does not have a cybersecurity law, many of these scams are harder to prosecute. They are harder to be seen and correctly framed as a crime, and they are harder to be prosecuted by law enforcement. So cybercrime regulation and cooperation between law enforcement authorities is something that is being discussed. Of course, consumer protection. There are several initiatives to try to harmonize different approaches to consumer protection, but different countries are saying we need more than harmonization. We need to have sort of an international bureau that could act as a clearinghouse to try to sort out disputes related to consumer protection in e-commerce, taking into account that e-commerce is increasingly cross borders, and of course strong frameworks for privacy and data protection. This is something that the European Union has taken big steps with a general data protection regulation that is going to be into force soon, and this reinforces privacy not only from the standpoint of different relations that we have online, the companies that hold our data, but also with regards to commerce too. So data protection, cybersecurity, consumer protection are different legal frameworks that countries need to put in place on a national level and work harder to harmonize on the international level too. And everyone should be tuned to what is going to happen in the WTO Ministerial in December, and after that, and we will be covering that as well in Diplo websites and Diplo courses.
Thank you, Marilia. Very important to bring back this emphasis on international negotiations and some of the activities that aim at facilitating the cross-border flow of data. We have, on the one hand, the practicalities, and we have more questions in that category. And on the other hand, we have the ideology around it. We have the large-scale projects that aim at putting in place a number of frameworks for this. On the practical side, we have 3 questions from Mohammed from Palestine, if I remember correctly. How does the e-Residency program facilitate accessing investment in Estonia? Is there a governmental fund for entrepreneurs who apply for e-Residency? And does it become easier to get a visa once you're having the e-Residency to Estonia? This is the first set of questions. And I would add to that also a question from my side. E-commerce is usually seen as a very good vehicle for promoting the work of female entrepreneurs and for involving women in international commerce activities. So I was wondering if you have statistics around
Sure. Do you want to tackle these?
Okay. So I'll start from backwards. So the first question from Muhammad is applying for visa, whether it's easier with e-residency or not. Straightforward answer is that no, e-residency directly at the moment does not benefit for applying for a visa. However, you can check our partners in Estonia, Startup Estonia, they have a startup visa. So if you start a business with e-Residency, you have an option to apply for a startup visa. Or another way is to apply for a residence permit if you really want to move to Estonia, based on different criteria, for example, being a business owner or having a business. Of course, this already expects you to have funds to invest into your business. Now going to the second one, is there any governmental fund for entrepreneurs who apply for e-Residency? We have discussed it with our team, and at the moment, no, we don't have a specific e-Residency startup program, but Estonia has access to EU grants, and EU has a lot of different grants for research and also for starting entrepreneurs, and those are operated by Enterprise Estonia. So if you go to the website www.eas.ee, you can find information about different grants. And if you do register a company in Estonia, it will be treated as any other Estonian company, and you will be able to access different funding from EU. I know that a lot of people from India have used funding for research, and there are also quite many who have used the startup funding. And about investment in Estonia, if you have a business in Estonia, registered in Estonia, it gives you the trusted environment, and you can find investors. You can also use the same Startup Estonia website to promote your startup or to find investors. And also some of the business service providers help to find investors.
And yeah, that's perfect. And then I guess for Roxana's question, so we do have a public stats dashboard. We're very transparent, where we list the breakdown of who is becoming an e-resident and who's setting up a company, which countries they're from. And we do see majority of our e-residents are men, And you know, there's a variety of reasons for that, but you know, we do have some initiatives. We're working with part of the E-Trade for All program with a pilot in India to help support women entrepreneurs there. And I think, you know, really, as e-residency grows, it is a good opportunity for men and women everywhere, you know, to sort of be equalized and have the opportunity to become entrepreneurs. So maybe if their home country, you know, there's some barriers to them becoming entrepreneurs in their home country, you know, e-Residency gives them a great opportunity to access Estonia's services and start a company online. So really, I think it's a great empowerment tool for all entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much for this. We will check the statistics afterwards as well. While we are waiting for a few more questions, I see people are typing in the chat. I'm going to turn back to Marilia and ask her a general question about the digital commerce activities that relate strictly to cross-border flows. So Marilia, what can you tell us about the EU market and the harmonized rules, and going more deeply into the connection with the general data protection?
Thank you, Roxana. I think that one important thing that Europe is putting in place is to have a very in-depth discussion about cross-border flow of data and data localization. As I mentioned in the beginning, cross-border flow of data is in the basis of the transformations that we are talking about here, not only because a lot of physical products that once were carried in CDs or paper, like books and music, they have been digitized, so the physical base has disappeared. These products are now carried by datagrams online, but also because more and more people are aware that they can do cross-border commerce of services as well. So data flows is in the base of everything. And I think that Europe is at the forefront of having a very thorough discussion of how they can curb data localization, because usually we think that data localization provisions, which is a law that forces companies to have servers located in a specific jurisdiction, we usually think that this is a problem only in authoritarian countries or countries who want to have sort of hands-on control of information. But this is not true. Data localization happens for many different reasons. They happen, for instance, because law enforcement in all countries want to have easy access to information. When the information is located in another jurisdiction, then law enforcement needs to apply to the other country to have a request for information that takes a long time to be processed. And this is not feasible to law enforcement. Taxation is another reason. Usually tax authorities, they want the information to be stored in the territory so they can be more easily audited. Sensitive information. So there are a lot of reasons why data localization has been put in place. And there's a very good study in Europe that shows that many different countries in Europe have data localization provisions that are barriers to free flow of data. Therefore, trade gets sort of caught in this network of data localization provisions as well. So what the GDPR does, besides protecting privacy and data protection, providing data protection to individuals, is to curb one of the reasons why different countries in Europe were saying that they wanted to localize data, which is, I don't trust that the standards of protection of privacy are the same in neighboring countries, because previously data protection law was a directive. So different countries applied the principles of data protection in different ways. So the data protection regulation was different across jurisdiction. It was implemented differently in different jurisdictions. And that caused a confusion for companies. That caused raised costs in terms of adjusting to different jurisdictions and different specific provisions on data protection. So what the GDPR does from a sort of a cross-border flow of information standpoint is to end with one of the justifications for data localization, which was, let's localize data for privacy reasons, because all the privacy protections will be uniform all across the European Union member countries, and of course that will have a positive side effect on cross-border flow of data and on trade as well. So it's a positive measure in Europe.
Thank you very much. So let me turn to Alex and Ait now. How does it work currently with data localization in Estonia? And I will add to that also the question from the chat room. We have Vladimir asking, how did the recently discovered flaw in the crypto key of the...
Sure. So, you know, I'm not quite as well versed in these topics as Maria is. So I think she explained quite well, you know, what Europe is doing, and you know, Estonia is part of the same system. So I'm not sure I have quite a good answer for that, but I'm happy to discuss the other topic, which is the recently discovered flaw in the ID card. The Estonian ID card was manufactured by a company called Gemalto, and they produced chips for national ID cards around the world and also for credit cards. And you know, this issue is affecting many people using many different services. But I think what Estonia did differently is that as soon as they found out, they went into action to develop a plan for people to protect themselves. It's important to remember that there was actually no known cases of anyone actually exploiting this. It was pretty difficult to do. It took a lot of computing power to sort of access this exploit. So, you know, as soon as we heard about it, Estonia started implementing a way for people to log on to online and update their cards. And now many people have done that procedure. All the certificates of the cards have been closed. So everyone is actually totally safe right now. You just need to log in and update your certificates. And truly, despite being sort of you know, a tough situation to get through, it's been handled very well. On the other hand, I can maybe be a little bit competitive here, and Spain, Spanish national ID cards have the same problem. And although Spain doesn't have as many digital services that their ID cards can access, you know, they haven't handled this quite as well as Estonia. So Estonia has really handled this as well as they could, and we're happy that we're sort of moving beyond this now, and everyone is safe and sound and updated their ID cards.
Thank you. I guess this brings us to a much bigger question about the security and trust in the system. Did you see any hesitations around applying for e-Residency once the news came out? Did you feel there was something that you needed?
So I would like to take that. Surprisingly, no, all already residents and those who are fans of e-Residency were very pro the program and also welcomed the communication, because as soon as the Estonian government learned about the potential risk, they communicated it. Our team communicated it, we were open about it, and it's like with any other technology. When it develops, you will need to go on and forward with it. So being an Estonian using digital services every day, I can't imagine living without my ID card. I wouldn't say that the trust would got harm in any way. It doesn't matter what happens with technology, it matters how the government deals with it. And as Alex said, in my opinion as well, Estonia was a good example of how to keep the trust.
Yeah, I think in Estonia, you know, Estonia have taught me this, and it's a good lesson, important lesson to remember, that whenever you're the first person to do something, you're also the first person that discovers the problems when, you know, involved with these new technologies and stuff. So instead of when you're the pathfinder for something, of course you're going to be the first one that has to deal with the problem. So yeah, Estonia, as an outsider who moved here a year ago, it's been truly pretty amazing to watch how they handle this situation.
Thank you. Indeed, if you are starting a program, you have to assume you will be faced with some risks. And I know that Estonia has not been completely isolated from risks ever since the early days of adopting digital technologies. There were the cyber attacks in 2007, and Estonia also reacted swiftly to that. More recently, we've heard a discussion about the virtual.
Sure. So I would just say that because everything in Estonia is done digitally online, one of the most important things is integrity of the data. So as the former president always says of Estonia always says, take medical records for example. It's not so important if someone were to get on there and view the record and see that you are a type O blood type. The bigger challenge is ensuring that they can't change that data and say you have type A blood type, or I'm not a biologist, so really data integrity is super important. So this project was really a way for Estonia to house its data outside of the country, and as a backup, just in case something were to happen, and so that the data of the country could continue operating even if something catastrophic did happen here within the territory of Estonia. So it's just sort of just another backup plan. And I think that's part of Estonia's also system that's worked well, is that personal data is not stored in one database. It's stored in distributed databases, and it's connected through a system called X-Road, which is another layer of protection for people. Unlike the U.S., where I feel like every month or so I hear about how some new big database of people has been leaked, and my data has been leaked I don't know how many times as a U.S. citizen. So really, this is the difference between what Estonia is doing and what maybe the U.S. and other places are doing.
Thank you very much. I think we are approaching the end of the webinar. I would like to thank our experts, Maria, Alex, Ait, for their contributions today, and I would like to thank our participants for all their questions and for making this discussion very interactive. We will provide a recording of this webinar in the coming days, so those of you who want to check some of the details back or share with your colleagues, you can do that. You will get an email about it shortly. So thank you very much, everyone. I wish you all a very good day. Enjoy wherever you are in the world the rest of the day. And we look forward to hearing more about the developments in the e-Residency program, about digital commerce activities and the global negotiations. And you are invited to check that on our website, the Digital Watch, where we have a page dedicated to e-commerce. You're also invited to check our capacity development activities, including the course that we run regularly on this. And generally stay in touch if you have things that you'd like to communicate and update.
Thank you.